Thank you so much for being here. You don't know how much we've been anxious to see you back at the festival. It's been 3 years, and it's just so gratifying for you to come to have waited for us to come back. We've certainly been waiting for y'all to get back. So thank you for being here. I'm Jim Davis. I'm the director of the Louisiana Center for the Book and the Louisiana Book Festival. And on behalf of all of the people who work at the State Library, thank you so much for your support, your continued support. I want to especially thank Lieutenant Governor Billy Nungesser for being with us. I know he has a busy schedule, but he sees the importance of the Louisiana Book Festival and reading and literacy, and he's always supportive of what we do. I also want to recognize in the audience a previous Louisiana Writer Award winner, and that's Darrell Bork. Thank you, Darrell, for being here. Johnette Downing, another previous recipient, was here. She had to go with her husband to a program that he's doing, a book he's written. He had to get up to the Capitol. So we appreciate that she was here with us too. And I also want to say welcome to Lucy Armand for being with us. Thank you, Lucy. Is she here? Okay. Oh, yeah. In this book, 21st Century Southern Writers, there are 19 chapters or essays, each on a different writer. And 11 of the 19 authors in the book have appeared at the Louisiana Book Festival, and including 3 authors from Louisiana, Barb Johnson from Lake Charles and New Orleans, and Skip Horrick from Baton Rouge, and our recipient today, David Armand from Hammond. This book is being featured at the festival today, and there's a program on the schedule for that. In Dixon Hearn's essay on David, called In Your Heart, he writes, "One common feature in all his work links it inextricably to that of Southern writers such as Flannery O'Connor, William Faulkner, Cormac McCarthy, and I'm adding Eudora Welty, the use of Southern settings to deal with distinctly American and even universal themes. And that his work, much like Harry Crews, Larry Brown, Tom Franklin, and Ron Rash, and I'm adding William Gay, attempts to use place as a sort of character in and of itself, all to show the influence of a particular geography on the people who inhabit it, especially those of blue-collar, lower middle-class backgrounds. David, born and raised in Louisiana, has worked as a drywall hanger, a draftsman, and a press operator in a flag printing factory. And look at him now. He's an assistant professor of creative writing at Southeastern Louisiana University, and David is the 23rd recipient of the Louisiana Writer Award in recognition of his outstanding contributions to Louisiana's literary and intellectual life, exemplified by his body of work. I'm not going to go over everything in his biography that's included in the program. There's 2 pages. You can read that later, deservedly so. And also there's a program later in which this David will be discussing his work with another David who is also in the audience, David Johnson, a member of the State Library Board. So rather than that, I'm going to tell you a little just in general. He's the author of 4 novels, all set in Louisiana, 3 volumes of poetry, The Evangelist, just published this month, a memoir where you can learn even more about him, and a collection of creative nonfiction essays coming this spring from our state's own University of Louisiana at Lafayette Press. We like it when the books, that we can feature books that are printed by those publishers who are located here in the state. And so I was really glad to hear that once we had picked our Louisiana Writer Award recipient for this year, there's already a book on the way. In the program, you can read the praise and recognition David has received for his work there. But I want to share this in the voice of Jack Bedell, 2017-19 Louisiana Poet Laureate, upon learning David would be receiving this award today. He said, "Whether I'm speaking from my own perspective as a former teacher, his friend, his faculty colleague, a fellow husband and father, or another South Louisiana author, I am here to tell you David Armand is a treasure. Both in his writing and in his life, David is driven by honesty and hope. His memoirs, poems, and works of fiction lean heavily into these two themes, but they never blink in the face of hard times, nor do they shy away from the work it takes to persevere through those trials on the way to salvation. It's rare to find a writer or a human being capable of being an honest example of that struggle. David Armand is that writer and that person, and I'm very proud we are celebrating him for his accomplishments and for the person he is." And back to Dixon's essay. Like all literature that aspires to transcend its genre and its place, Armand uses this distinct southern setting of southeast Louisiana to wrestle with the universal theme of one's constant and hopeful search for human connection. The closing line of his poem, Mischief, expresses that idea succinctly. Until someone stops them, says, "Come here, son, I love you." That hope, or something quite like it, sustains us all. David, we all love you, and we are so proud that you are our 2022 Louisiana Writer Award recipient. Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for being here. Jim, I want to thank you and your team. You never get enough credit for putting on this great event every year and getting so many great writers to come out and share their books with us. I wanted to mention, when I leave here, I'll be going to speak to the conference at the Marriott of Louisianans that are blind. And I remember when I first took office, because of budget cuts, programs for the blind, the programs that are downloaded through the library system will cut at the budget. And so we moved tourism money to fund those valuable programs. And coming here today, seeing so many incredible writers, we want to do more to get more writers' books turned into treasures that the blind can enjoy. So I hope to leave here today and get with our team to see that as many books here that we can transform into the program so the blind can download it. And I will share that with them today, because there are so many great stories here that we take for granted that we can read and enjoy. But I just wanted to share that with you. I learned in presenting this award today that the first Louisiana Writer Award in 2000 was a late Ernest Gaines. And as he set the standards for excellence in all of the Louisiana Writer Awards who will follow, it's only fitting that his growth as a writer today, you had the privilege of introducing Ernest Gaines at a previous book fest, I learned. So that's pretty neat that you got to introduce him being the first one to receive this award. But in the tradition of excellence among Louisiana writers continues, On behalf of the Louisiana Center for the Book, the State Library System, and the Department of Recreation and Tourism, it's my honor as Lieutenant Governor to present to you the 23rd Louisiana Writers Award to David Armand, a true son of Louisiana that has that love and passion that so many others before you have. So it's a great honor to be here and recognize you for the work you've done. So I think I'm supposed to give you this award now. Jim, get up here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So originally I was expecting that there was going to be a deluge outside while I was doing this. So I had like kind of written that into my speech, but now there's no rain. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for being here to help me and all of us to celebrate the written word and our shared love of books and their unique magic and their indescribable significance. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Nungesser, for your tireless work in promoting our state's rich and beautiful culture. And thank you, Robbie Wilson, who I don't see, but I know Robbie's busy. And all the folks at the State Library of Louisiana and the Louisiana Center for the Book, especially Jim Davis, who has been so incredibly supportive and kind to me over the years. And Jim, I'll never forget, for as long as I live, the day that you called me a couple of months ago now to tell me that I was the recipient of this award. We had a long conversation, I remember, and I wasn't even sure why you'd called it first, but after telling me about some of the festival's feature this year and how thrilled you were for it to be returning in person after 2 very long years, you started to mention how you'd be needing someone to interview the Louisiana Writer Award recipient. And I remember you said, we'll need a good interviewer, and we'll need someone who really knows our honoree well and who can do a good job. So at that point, I was fully expecting for you to ask me to interview the winner, which I would have happily done. And I would have been honored to do it. But then you said, we'll need somebody really good this time because the person that's being interviewed is you. And you said, David, you're the winner of the 2022 Louisiana Writer Award. And so I sat down, actually I more like collapsed down I was in my bedroom on my cell phone, and so there's this little wooden chest in front of my bed, and I just kind of collapsed onto that. And then I said, the only thing I could think of that could come out of my mouth, and I somehow still remember saying it, I said, come on, Jim. I thought he was playing a prank on me. And he said, no, David, you're our winner this year. And after that, I just sat there probably, to me it seemed about like 5 minutes, but I cried. and poor Jim had to repeat himself a few times it's like, so say this again, I'm the winner of the award this year. And so he patiently repeated himself for me and kind of got choked up with me a little bit. And so it was a good phone call to get. And so thank you again for just being patient as I processed the news over the phone. I just can't imagine a better call to receive and not a better person to receive a call like that from. And I also want to thank you, Jim, for always including me here in the festival year after year. Even from when my first book came out, which was in 2010, so this is the 12th year that I've been here in various roles. Even the times when I didn't have a book or when the pandemic forced everything to go online, you still managed to find a place for me, whether it was moderating panels or introducing other writers. Last year I moderated a panel with Cheryl St. Germain, who is another winner of this award. And then Maurice Ardoin, who wrote a really, really good memoir that I always plug when I can. It's about growing up in a motel that his parents operated in southwestern Louisiana, and he actually lived in the motel, and he had about 9 siblings, I think. It's a really great book. And Jim, thank you again for inviting me to give a virtual poetry reading during the pandemic as the Just Listen to Yourself series that the library puts on. And each year the Poet Laureate hosts this. And I may be mistaken, but I'm sure that was Daryl's brainchild. Wasn't it originally the Just Listen to Yourself event? Yeah. And so thank you for coming up with that, because that was great. You know, and it's a great event every year. And in 2020 or 2021, whenever that was, when John Warner Smith emailed me to ask if I would participate virtually. And so I remember sitting in my backyard, recording with my cell phone, reading some poems, and I had chickens at that time, and they were all clucking in the background. And somehow Robbie, with his computer wizardry, and also I always have to mention Robbie, if you haven't heard his voice when he narrates or introduces, he sounds like somebody who could do the trailers for movies. You know, he's just this great voice. But even despite the distance, the physical distance, it felt like an intimate and engaging event. And that was an honor to read with the Poet Laureate, John Warner Smith, who I believe is here today. I'm sure that I'll see him. And thank you also, Jim, for the time you asked me to interview my former teacher one year, Tim Gautreaux, who's another winner of this award a few years ago. And I'll always be indebted to Dr. Gautreaux. In fact, I owe this award in a lot of ways to him and to his skill as a teacher. He was one of the first people who told me that it was okay to write about where I lived. I grew up in Folsom. It's a village. It's one red light. They have two red lights now. When I was a kid, there was one. He told me, stories don't have to take place in New York to be good, or they don't have to take place in Los Angeles to be good. And he said, look at people like Faulkner. Look at people like, well, he didn't say William Gay, but eventually by discovering Faulkner, I discovered William Gay, and I discovered Tom Franklin, and saw they were writing about Mississippi. And a lot of people were reading them. And at some point in my career, I had gotten to visit this Faulkner exhibit, and there's a huge following of Faulkner in Japan, of all places. But what that told me was that his work speaks to everybody. It doesn't matter that he was writing about this little bitty old town in Oxford, Mississippi. And so Tim taught me that you could take the particulars of your life and make them universal as long as you were being honest. But as a teacher, he could also be pretty tough on me. But some students that can scare away, but others use that as motivation to be better writers, and that's the way I looked at it. And so I still, to this day, remember, I turned in stories to him and gotten some sort of harsh criticisms, but it thickened my skin, but it also made me want to write a better story. My goal was always to write a story that Tim Gautreaux is going to like. And so I remember right before I graduated, I turned in a story about a girl who wears a back brace because she has scoliosis. And one day this kid who she's friends with, a young man, comes over to her house, and she takes the back brace off, and she says, do you want to look at it? And it sounds creepy, and it kind of is creepy, but so she takes it off and sets it down. And when she goes to the bathroom, the boy puts the back brace on and tries it on to kind of get the feel of how it feels. And so it obviously an homage in a way to Flannery O'Connor's Bible salesman stealing the wooden leg and running away down the cornfield. But it was the first story that I wrote that earned Tim's unconditional, or almost unconditional approval, because he still had some things to say about it. But what I didn't tell him, though, was that actually happened to me. I knew a girl in junior high who had scoliosis, and she lived right down the road from me. She and I had grown up since kindergarten, and then one day she just stopped coming to school, and I didn't really know why. And she wouldn't care that I'm telling you all this because I wrote about it, and I'll kind of explain that a little in a minute. But Anyway, I didn't try on her back brace, but I remember seeing it and being kind of interested in it and looking at it and touching it. It was like made out of this like rubbery kind of plastic, and it was brown, and it was just, it's like it's something you don't really see all the time. But my point in saying all that is that I took Tim Gotro's advice and I wrote what I knew. That was something that happened to me, and I knew about it, and so I wrote about it. And it made the writing feel authentic, I guess, because I still have this email, and I almost printed it out to read from it, but I just remember the way he wrote it. He said, "This is the best thing you've written so far." And it was great because that was the last thing that I had it was going to turn into him, so that was good. And then he said, he's like, "You do this well, you do this well, you can fix this part." He's like, "But it's that back brace." And that's how he ended the email. He said, "It's the back brace." And that was the end. He didn't say, "All best, Dr. Gotro," or nothing. It was just like, "It's the back brace." And but it told, I know he's really into like mechanics and machinery and like things like that. But I think what he probably sensed in this story was that sense of realism. And it was because I was writing about something that actually happened or that I was familiar with. Later, that story became a part of my novel, Harlow, my second novel. And my friend, her name's Sarah, she read that novel and called me up. Well, it was actually weird because her dad was reading the novel, and she said he was sitting on the couch. He's like, "Sarah, come downstairs. Your back brace is in David's novel." And so like she said, you've immortalized that thing. And she said, because I was so ashamed of that when I was in school. That's why she stopped coming. She was homeschooled for a couple of years until she had to stop wearing it. So she wasn't mad, at least, and she didn't feel like I exploited her by writing about that. But that's something as a writer we always have to think about too, I think, is, saying things but not too much. You don't want people to get mad at you. So all this is just to make the long point that if Dr. Gotro hadn't liked that story so much, maybe I wouldn't have written more after that, but it's hard to say. But my point is that good teachers, great teachers, know how to push you to the point where you can do the best work that you can do, and he did that. And I've been really blessed to have more teachers than just Tim Gotro who have helped me, not only as a writer, but just as a human being. And I didn't cry when Jim was reading the words from Jack Bedell because I had already read them and cried a couple of times already. So the tears have dried themselves out. But he was my first teacher as an undergrad, and he taught me how to write poetry and dispelled all the myths that I had, or these preconceived notions I had about what poetry was. Like that it was supposed to rhyme, or that it was supposed to be about these very high-minded subjects that only 30 people could understand, like a secret code that you had to crack. And when I met Jack Bedell, he had hair down to his shoulders, and he was like in a hard rock band called Nail Boss. And it was like, man, this dude is he looks like the guy who I would have idolized in high school because he's a poet. Like poets can look like this, and I just thought that was the coolest thing. And he would come to class, at the time he was in an administrative position too, and he would come to class dressed like how I am. Which, by the way, I haven't worn this in probably 12 years, so I'm not the most formal person, but it's a nice suit. But he would come to class dressed like this, and he said, "You know what, y'all? I don't feel so good in this suit. I'm going to go in my office and change into something more comfortable." And he'd come back out to class with a Tool T-shirt on, the band Tool, and then he would teach the class. But that was a great experience because he taught me that you don't have to sort of adopt this real persona to be a poet, and that you could write about, like Tim Gotro taught me, about Louisiana, and it's sort of if you're from here, you're sort of obligated to do so. And Jack sort of epitomizes that. I think he's, I call him here a true culture bearer. He writes about the loss of land in Louisiana, and he writes about the issues that our ecology faces and important things like that. And he understands the responsibility of what it means to do the work that we do as artists and the legacy that we leave behind for others. And so I wish that Jack could be with us here today. I know he's here in spirit, but I wanted to dedicate this award to him because I feel like in some ways this award should be his. Just because he's just done so much for me as a human being to make me a better human being. And so I hope that he at least sees this and knows that how much he's meant to me as a person. He's always believed in me from the first day I met him, as a writer and as a person. He hired me to work as his editorial assistant at Louisiana Literature, which is the literary publication that we have at Southeastern. He taught me about publishing, he taught me about editing, and he was kind of like a father figure to me in a lot of ways. And I kind of am guilty of sort of putting that burden onto him. You know, I'm not ashamed. I mean, like Jim mentioned, I have a memoir, so I mean, I feel like when you write a memoir and tell your whole life story, you can't really keep any secrets from people in public. So, you know, I was adopted, and I had, you know, that need for like a male role model, like an older person who could teach me. And I sort of put that on Jack without him necessarily wanting that or needing that, but he has kids. But he kind of took on that role. And it's funny because now I'm a teacher, and you never know as a teacher whose lives you're going to change. And when you do, it's rare that you find out about it in such a tangible way as this, something that you can hold in your hands, this award, which, by the way, feels like it weighs about 10 pounds. It doesn't look like it would. It's small, but it's heavy. But that's a tangible way to say that his teaching has sort of generated this, I think, and other teachers as well, but I always like to acknowledge Jack and my love for Jack. He's a great human being. I also had another teacher who I like to mention all the time, Norman German, is another Louisiana writer who had a different approach to teaching writing. He was more of a practical sort of, you need to make your manuscript as clean as possible before you send it anywhere. No technical, mechanical errors. It has to be polished. And he was a stickler about that. And he would I could write what I thought was the best story I'd ever written, and he'd give me a D on it because I didn't punctuate the dialogue properly. And, you know, of course, I would get kind of mad and be like, come on, man, why is this guy being like this? But it helped me because now when I submit manuscripts, there's no mistakes on them, because I always remember Norman, he used to have a stamp that he would put on our stories that said, we talked about this, but it was just WTAT, and then sometimes he had like a little plus that he would add to it because we talked about this twice, and then by the time he got that third plus, it was like, okay, you're out of my class. But he didn't do that to me because I always listened to him. But all of those teachers challenged me and inspired me. They cared about me over the years, all through my times of self-doubt, my times of fear of failure, personal struggle. And when I was first starting out as a teacher, I was so broke, I remember, that Jack offered to pay for my faculty hang tag that semester because I couldn't afford it, and he never asked for the money back. And it was $40, but that's how bad off I was. I'd just gotten out of grad school, you know, I had a bunch of student loans, and Jack paid for that, and I didn't ask him to do that. He just said, I got you, bro, and he paid for it. And Norman, he would take me to lunch sometimes with his wife, who's an artist, Regine Clark, and they live in Lake Charles now, I think. And I still remember very fondly having lunch with them. And so at the end of the day, I think this honor really is about all of the people who have helped me along the way, teachers, family, friends. And so really this award is just as much for them as it is for me. And if you're sitting here this morning, you know who you are. You know, I have a lot of support and a lot of friends and family. I'm very lucky. And finally, I want to thank you, Jim, just one more time. And I know this is a Jim fest of thanks, but you've just done so much for me. I couldn't help just remember all these things and think about them. But for the year that you allowed me to introduce the late Ernest J. Gaines, and I stress the word allowed because I felt like it could have been anybody who had that honor, but you allowed me to do it. And he was the inaugural winner of this award, as Lieutenant Governor Nungesser said. And recently, just yesterday, I saw that his image has been added to a postage stamp, which is so cool. And it's such a beautiful tribute. And he was such a Louisiana writer in every sense. He moved away for a little while. He went to Stanford, just like old Jay over there. And he came back and he said, "I'll never leave this place again." He wrote 2 stories that took place in San Francisco, and that was all. He said, "I'll never write another story that doesn't take place in Louisiana." I think he called it that Louisiana thing that drives me. But I remember another phone call that I had gotten from Jim, and he said, "You know, I want you to be a part of the festival. You didn't have a book come out this year, but I'd like you to still participate, and we need people to introduce some of our writers." So go ahead, look at the website, look at the roster, and see if there's anybody that you might like to introduce. So I'm looking through it, and I see Ernie Gaines on there, and so I'm thinking, I guess I probably didn't think about it, because otherwise I wouldn't have said this, but I said, "Well, what about Ernest Gaines?" Kind of half joking, and Jim said, "We can work that out." and so it was like a feeling of excitement and by like a feeling of incredible nervousness, because then I thought, oh my gosh, I am going to introduce Ernest Gaines. So I like labored over this speech and wanting to capture his work and the essence of his work and the importance of what he's done for us as a state and as people. And so Jim arranged that to happen. And I remember I didn't sit down and cry after that phone call. I think I just had a lot of anxiety for a little while, and then I wrote a speech and introduced him. And at the end of it, Mr. Gaines was kind enough to let me take a picture with him, and I still have that. And I show my students all the time when I teach a Gaines story in class or in a Gaines novel. I'm like, and not to show off, but just to say, look how cool this is. Like if you get involved, you can meet your heroes, and you can. And he was just the sweetest man or one of the sweetest men I've ever met, and I'll always cherish that. And I have a lot of fond memories of coming here over the years with my family as my kids have grown up. When they were little, it was a different experience. The kids' tents and all the face painting and those things were fun. Now that they're a little bit older, it's a little bit of a different experience, but I'm still so honored to be able to have my family with me and show them around the Capitol and talk about the history. Going up the elevator in the Capitol building, which if you have not done that, the elevator is probably about it feels like it's about 10 square feet. Maybe it's a little bigger than that. So if you are claustrophobic, maybe you shouldn't do it, but it's worth it because you go up there and you can look down and see this kind of symmetrical design that, the sidewalks and then with all the tents, and it's a beautiful thing to see from up there. But take an umbrella with you if you go over there today and look. Is the Capitol building even, I know they're doing renovations on it, so I don't know if they're letting people up, but anyway, try it out. I was telling Jeanette earlier, she is at another event, but she came in to congratulate me. And that's another thing. Everybody has been so supportive and lovely. And I've gotten a lot of nice emails, but I was telling her that when I was in 4th grade, I came on a field trip here. And I think Buddy Roemer was the governor at that time. I'm looking over at Lieutenant Governor because maybe I thought he would remember. Buddy Roemer, was it with mid-'80s, was he governor then? Okay, so my memory is not completely gone. But I remember the teacher showing us the Senate room where there was a pencil stuck in the ceiling because in the 70s someone had lit off a stick of dynamite in there, like a terrorist act, sort of. And then I thought, did that really happen? And then I was talking to Meg earlier, and she said, no, and then that pencil's still there in the ceiling. And then I remember taking my kids to the corridor where Governor Long was assassinated as he was coming out of the elevator. And that history is so important in Louisiana. It's important anywhere, but especially to me in this state. And I had written down, I didn't know if those were apocryphal or not, but it confirmed for me that no, they're not. Those things did happen, and so it's good that those things are still being preserved. So hopefully, as they renovate over there, they don't take that pencil down, because I think that needs to stay there. But I never could have imagined back then in 5th grade. My biggest concern that day, I remember, was, am I going to hold hands with this girl who I had this big crush on? I was 5th grade. What was I thinking about that for? But I wanted to hold her hand on the way back to Folsom as we rode the bus, and I did hold her hand, and that was just like the coolest thing, even though my hands were probably all sweaty and clammy. But I never thought then that I'd be back here in this capacity, accepting this award, and receiving an honor from, the people in the place that I've called home my entire life. And that's amazing to me. I mean, you just never know where you're going to end up or how you're going to end up there. But again, I mean, I owe it all. It's not something that I've just done completely by myself. I've had a lot of supportive, kind, beautiful people who have helped me. One other memory I have, a very fond memory, and I know I'm getting close to my time, but I just want to mention this because this is great, and it's sort of maybe a little bit of levity to the more serious parts of the things I've said, but Yusef Komunyakaa, another winner of this award, a beautiful poet, beautiful human being. He came to visit where I work at Southeastern as a visiting author. And I remember he was staying at this real fancy B&B in Hammond, and my department head called me up and he said, we need somebody to pick up Yusef Komunyakaa from the B&B and drive him over to campus. Would you mind doing it? So I was like, okay, sure, I'll do that. I've never met him, and I've read all his work, and I'm a little bit intimidated, but I'll do it. So I have this little beat-up Ford Ranger pickup truck with, like, the guy who owned it before me, I think, was a house painter, so it's got like splashes of little paint all over the place in it. And so he's waiting outside with his suit. He's very distinguished. And I said, I hope you don't mind. I mean, he was probably expecting like a limo or something to pick him up. And he said, not at all, not at all. This is perfect. This is great. And he speaks very, very he has this great voice, great. And so he sits in my little beat-up truck, and I drive him to campus. And it reminded me of the scene in Scent of a Woman, if you've ever seen that, when Al Pacino is walking across the street, and the boy tries to take his arm, and he pulls away, and he's like, I take your arm. Yusef Komunyakaa didn't do that to me, but he took my arm as we were walking through this throng of students waiting to meet him. I mean, there were like 1,200 students waiting to hear him read, and I could tell he was a little bit unnerved, even though he's Yusef Komunyakaa. So I mean, that never leaves you. I think that those nerves never leave you. But he read about being in Vietnam and growing up in Bogalusa during Jim Crow, and it was a great reading. He cried while he was reading. Somebody in the audience asked him what his thoughts were about race relations in the South, which is a very prickly topic. And his response was, I'm a poet. And so my only response to that is to read you a poem. And so he read a poem I'll never forget. It was called A Steel Plate. And it was about a man who had come back from the war, who had a steel plate in his head. And he would just spend his evenings drinking muscadine wine. And one day the cops came and just dragged him out of his house. And as Yusef Komunyakaa was reading that poem, he was crying the whole time. And I think everybody else in the audience was crying, myself included. I cry a lot. I mean, I'm not ashamed to admit that. But literature moves me in that way. And he's a great speaker, great reader. But the funny part of this whole thing is at the book festival one year, someone came up to me and they said, hey, we're going to go sit down in the lobby and have dinner with Yusef Komunyakaa. Do you want to join us? I had my wife and my kids with me, and I said, sure, yeah, that'd be great. We'll go have dinner with Yusef Komunyakaa. And so we get our food, and he pulls out his cell phone, and he says, I hope you don't mind. I can't do his voice. He has such a great voice. But he says, I hope you don't mind, but I need to take a picture of my food to send it to my wife. And I just thought, that's like the last person on earth I would imagine, like, taking a selfie with his whatever he had ordered. But I thought that was so cool, and that was another thing that made me realize, like, writers are real people just like everybody else. We take selfies. We do, the laundry, we wash the dishes and all those things, just like everybody else. And that was a cool experience. And he's also someone who's received this award before me, and I'm still just in awe that my name is among all these other names of writers I've admired and read over the years. And so the last thing I'll say, I mean, whether this is good or bad, I don't know, I've mentioned this before, but I've never been outside of this state for more than about 2 weeks at a time, like ever. And again, I don't know if that's good or bad to limit my experiences that much, but when I do go away, I always feel drawn back to it, like it's like a magnet pulling me back. It's almost like when I'm at work all day and I know my family's waiting for me to come home, and it's the same sort of feeling. It's like home. This is home. Like I'm like, it's in my blood, Louisiana. And last week, I went to a Louisiana Wildfowl Carvers and Collectors Guild, that's a mouthful, meeting, because my grandfather was the president of that organization, and he was like a master decoy carvesman, I don't know if that's the right word, but carver. And he actually, and I would like to go try to find if this is still there, I Googled him, and he had sold some of these decoys because they're prized things, their artwork, and one of them, and it may have Dave Treen, was in the later 80s, bought one of my grandfather's decoys for $2,000 and displayed it outside the governor's mansion. Do you? Yeah, so Edward Alba is my grandfather, and so he's someone else. I didn't actually write him into this speech, but I'll mention him now because he was, what's that?
I know the story. My dad was Tree's chief of staff.
Yeah,
So I know the decoy.
Yeah, oh my gosh, if that is still there.
Tree never spent money on anything.
Yeah, I would love to see if that's, I don't know where that could possibly be now, but
I know his son, so I'll try to see.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Yeah, and the only reason I mentioned that, I hadn't even written that or planned to mention it, but I just happened to go to that event last week and met people who remembered my grandfather. Yeah, and the whole time I was there, I was crying again because I kept seeing all these pictures, and then all these people were saying, "Oh, your grandfather was so sweet." Yeah, and it's like he was the sweetest man. But what it also made me realize is like this is just in my blood, like that he was like a Louisiana, and he was featured in these books that UL Press. Well, I'm pointing at Jay, but UL Press, the one who's publishing my next book. They have a couple of books that actually show some of his decoys in them, and I was only able to salvage one of them after Katrina. It's a little miniature one. But yeah, so I'm deeply enmeshed and married to this state and will never ever leave it, I promise. And so just thanks again, Jim, for all these memories and making me remember all these things that I had kind of forgotten about. And I also want to thank the people who have also supported me. Devin Lord, she's my editor at UL Press, who's putting out my memoir next spring, and then Jay Bruce Fuller, who's my editor at Texas Review Press. And then the late Paul Ruffin, who was his predecessor, who was the first person who took a chance on my work, and he sort of made that phone call that kind of changed my life, changed the whole course of my life. And then I have to thank David Johnson for reading all of my books, and I almost felt guilty because he agreed to do the interview after this, which, by the way, has been moved to the 5th floor of the State Library. If anybody's interested in going to that, it was supposed to be in a tent. Looks like it's not raining, but just to be sure, so I think we're going to be up on the 5th floor of the State Library for the interview. But David asked me to send my books to him. And I don't know if he realized how many books, and I'm not saying this to like brag about, but I don't know if he realized how many books I had. He said, yeah, I've been receiving like about 3 books a day for the past week. And I thought, man, I'm sorry. Don't feel like you have to read them all, But so he's got a big old stack of Armand books in his bookshelf, unless you just got sick of looking at them and donated them to someplace. I don't know. But I appreciate you reading them and reading interviews that I've given to have a good conversation, which I'm looking forward to doing. And I always have to say this because the greatest memory I've had of first meeting was you and Michael Sartisky had taken me to Parasols, and you ordered, or I ordered a roast beef po' boy and a Barks root beer, which is like, that's what you got to order when you go to Parasols. And we had lunch together, and that was a great day because Michael agreed to publish an excerpt of one of my novels in Louisiana Cultural Vistas, which is now 64 parishes, which was another sort of landmark, I guess, in my career that kind of helped me move along. I want to thank Dixon Hearn for always being supportive and for writing that beautiful analysis of my work that Jim read from earlier. I want to thank my family, my friends, all my colleagues at work, and also to my students. My students teach me new stuff every day, and I tell them I have the best job in the world because I can learn more. They keep me young, and I never want to be that person who just stops learning. And teaching is the greatest way that you can continue to learn. All the readers, writers, librarians, booksellers, all I ask is that you please don't ever stop what you're doing. And my promise is that I won't stop what I'm doing either. So that's my promise to you. So thank you all very much for being here and listening to me. It's such an honor. And now I believe it is real because my name is on that thing and I can see it. And so, it's real. So thank y'all so much. And go enjoy the rest. And it looks like the rain might not hit us, so this will be good.